Hello, my name is Ayomide Oshinjo. I'm a biomedical scientist. I'm talking about my project on the role of the gut microbiome and polycystic ovary syndrome and epigenetics. Now, I know those are big words, but I'll be explaining as we go along. Polycystic ovary syndrome is a complex endocrine and reproductive disorder that affects about 8 to 13% of reproductive aged women globally. This condition features hyperandrogenism, chronic inflammation, metabolic irregularities, and even infertility. Now, this metabolic and reproductive dysfunction are also highly prevalent on the male and female offspring of women with polycystic ovary syndrome. However, genetic factors do not solely account for the transmission of this trait across multiple generations, and thus it is thought that epigenetic changes are actually responsible, or they might actually contribute to the transmission of this trait across multiple generations. Now, what do I mean by epigenetic changes? Epigenetic changes are basically changes in gene expression without a change in the underlying DNA code. That means the gene is expressed differently, but the DNA structure and the DNA code remains the same. Now, to the gut microbiome. What's the gut microbiome? The gut microbiome is a complex community of microbial organisms that inhabits the gastrointestinal tract, and they are actually essential for health and well-being. Research has actually shown that alterations in the gut microbial community actually trigger epigenetic mechanisms such as histone modification, DNA methylation, and mRNA expression. Now, I know these are big words, but basically these are mechanisms that lead to the changes I described earlier, epigenetic changes. So these mechanisms ultimately lead to changes in gene expression and changes in gene expression without a change in the underlying DNA code. For this project, I conducted an extensive review using peer-reviewed articles to demonstrate how the gut microbiome acts as an epigenetic modulator in this condition. My findings essentially showed the step-by-step pathway through which the gut microbiome does this. First, dietary and environmental factors affect gut communities, and this leads to a condition known as dysbiosis. In this dysbiotic condition, metabolite production becomes abnormal. Now, these are metabolites such as short-chain fatty acids, vitamins such as folate, and dietary fat. This abnormal metabolite production triggers epigenetic mechanisms, which in turn then results in the reproductive and the metabolic traits discussed earlier. Now, this pathway essentially shows how a polycystic ovary syndrome patient can transfer an epigenetic predisposition to our offspring across multiple generations. Now, what is significant about this study? The impact of gut dysbiosis and its derived metabolites on epigenetic alterations in this condition may reveal important landmarks and risk indicators for the prognosis and the diagnosis of this condition. It also generates insight into developing gut-targeted therapies such as supplements, prebiotics, and probiotics, which exploit the crosstalk between the gut microbiome and epigenetic alterations. My major limitation during this study was that it was conducted during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this hindered my ability to conduct in-depth laboratory research to further understand this relationship. I recommend the researchers should actually pay close attention to this relationship, as it has the possibility of improving the quality of life of over 100 million diagnosed women and their offspring across the world. Thank you so much for listening.